The Chinese Vice-President Xi Jinping set out to visit the United States on February 13th on a three-country tour. And according to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the White House, he's going to visit Washington, D.C., California, and also on his itinerary, Iowa, which probably struggles a little harder for recognition. And various media reports said he's going to visit some old friends he met 27 years ago in a small town called Muscatine in Iowa. And at that time, he was a Hebei provincial party official leading a delegation of the local feed association to visit Iowa. But why did he pick Iowa this time again? And what's special about the state? And to go even further, how do American and Chinese people see each other? I've got three guests today. Well, it's my great pleasure inviting all of you, Professor Jin Canrong, the Associate Dean of Renmin University's School of International Relations, and Ms. Xiong Lei, author and also the former executive editor of China Features from Xinhua News Agency, and also Chris Clark, my colleague from China Daily website, Anchor, and also someone who spent 4 years living and studying in Iowa. So welcome you all. Well, Chris, let me start with you. So you've spent a good number of years in Iowa. What kind of state is Iowa? What's particular about it?
Driving into Iowa is an interesting sight. I think most of the time, driving down I-80, you'll see cornfields on both sides of you. So a lot of what Iowa's about is agriculture and agricultural-related business. It's a great state to be a part of that a lot of people may not pay much attention to.
Well, it seems to us, people who are outside the U.S., Iowa is certainly not as recognized as states like California or Texas. What about for people in the U.S.?
I think most people outside of Iowa, when they hear the state or hear, something about Iowa, a lot of people will sort of look at you funny and say, well, what's in Iowa? What's there? It's, everyone thinks it's, just cornfields and, that's it. And at the same time, I think when Iowa really comes into the national spotlight is in the political season for the Iowa caucus at the presidential election every 4 years.
I heard about Iowa plays a quite significant role in every U.S. presidential election because of its caucuses. Can you explain a little bit what caucus is and how it works?
Yeah, the Iowa caucus in the presidential election comes around every 4 years, and it's sort of it's the first and largest caucus of the political presidential election season. So essentially, what the results of the Iowa caucus give the public a view of who's in the lead in terms of getting a nomination for presidency early, and also who may not have a chance. It's not always the most accurate in terms of whoever wins the Iowa caucus taking the presidency or taking the nomination, but it receives so much media attention that that has an influence on voters around the country who are looking at Iowa as sort of a judge as to who they're voting for.
I see. Now we know a little bit about Iowa, but we haven't really touched upon the question why the Vice President Xi Jinping is going to visit Iowa this time.
I think the purpose to have that trip back to Iowa one is to revise his good memory at his first trip, and another thing I think is something relating with PR to show the humane of Chinese leaders. Something like just like Vice President Biden played here. Biden spent several hours at Beijing's Gulou, downtown Gulou.
Noodle restaurant.
Yeah, noodle restaurant.
I don't know if Vice President Xi visit to Iowa was related. It will be related to that, but I think Iowa deserves the attention because I remember that in the late 1970s, because of Chinese American Liu Hualin, who was a teacher at the University of Iowa. Iowa started the first program involving Chinese writers. That is the International Writing Workshop in the university, and a lot of quite a dozen of Chinese writers spent half year in Iowa because of that program, and that was one of the first people-oriented, people-to-people exchange program.
Well, we talk about showing leaders' personal sides or personal connections to people, and why is there a need for leaders to do that during a state-level visit?
Actually, Vice President Xi will have 3 stops in states, right? Washington, D.C. is a more political or policy-oriented stop. And then Iowa, that's the hotline. I noticed Chris used the term, right? Hotline. That's where the real American located. And then his 3rd stop is L.A. And I think the 3rd stop will be more economic-oriented, trade-oriented. As an average people, definitely people will pay more attention to the 2nd trip. In both countries, no matter how the elites play their prominent role, they have to keep contact, keep touch with grassroots.
With the public.
With public. Or your policy design will out of touch the fact, out of touch of the reality.
So is public opinion a key word here, public opinions?
From long-term viewpoint, definitely very important. I think the basic role is that the public opinion will set in the bottom line of your policy. If there exists a solid consensus among public, then the policymakers cannot go beyond that line.
Right. And talking about public opinion, and then I've got a few interesting sets of statistics collected by 2 polling institutions, and let me just share them with you. At the end of last year, China Daily and Horizon Research Group conducted a survey with 1,464 respondents in 7 major Chinese cities, most of which host U.S. embassy or consulates. Between 60 and 70% of Chinese people said they're confident China will surpass the U.S. as the world's largest economy in the near future. More than 90% of Chinese citizens said China-U.S. relations are important. More than 2/3 of Chinese people said the U.S. bears more responsibility in problems existing between China and the U.S. But compared to last year, 10% more people said both countries are responsible for problems. About 50% of Chinese citizens said they have a good impression of the U.S., which is 15% less than in 2009. Respondents said the top 5 key phrases that come to mind when describing the United States' national image are hegemony, developed economy, China-U.S. relations, freedom and democracy, and war and military. More than 70% of Chinese people said American culture has a positive influence on China. High-tech products, movies, universities, and sports can most represent American culture. I was wondering if there are any interesting facts or figures that surprise you.
The one that catches my eye is the 50% of Chinese citizens have a good impression of the U.S., which is 15% less than in 2009. I think that's a really hard statistic to judge based on the information that we're given. There's so many different impressions you can have of, politics or business or entertainment or, just person-to-person communication or culture. And so to say that 50% of Chinese people have a good impression of the U.S. is it raises a lot more questions. So I'd be interested to know how these people are forming their opinions.
100 years ago, Mark Twain told us there are 3 things you cannot believe. One is liar, second is evil lion, the third is statistics.
Okay, that's very clever.
You can pay some attention to this poll, but don't just rely on this poll to make your judgment. Just pay more attention to common sense issue.
For example?
For example, U.S. is still most powerful country in the world. So China has to make that relationship with states stable.
Like that question that China is going to surpass the United States as the #1 world economy anytime soon. I think that kind of statement is, if not nonsense, it's quite deceiving, because China's economic foundation is still not that strong, and the per capita GDP is very low. Disparity of the income is quite big. So we have many domestic problems before we can be really economically strong.
And what do you think would make people so confident about surpassing the U.S., for example?
I think it's largely because the influence of Western media. There are more Western media predict the date China surpassing the United States than Chinese media. The Chinese media not that confident to say that. But as you may notice, December last year, economists, they have a very bold prediction, right? China will surpass U.S. even according to currency value in the year of 2018, 6 years away, right? And before that, IMF predict China will surpass states in 2016. But that's according to PPP, purchasing power parity, right? So, a lot of these kind of prediction imported from West media into China, not invented by Chinese media,
Well, back at home, from people that you know, how do people see China? How do people see China's rise?
Well, what I think is that you're right, is this idea of China surpassing the U.S. is what you see when you turn on TV or the mass media. You see a headline on TV that says, and uses words like take over. China will take over the U.S. and China will, become #1. And I think in a lot of people's, viewpoints, that scares them or intimidates them. And at the same time, they take, just that headline, which is maybe all they've heard or all they know, and then they go on Twitter or social networking, just like you said, and that influences, they have the ability to broadcast their opinion, which is probably, maybe not so thoroughly researched.
To me, I'm more interested in the younger generations, and my impression is that perhaps, especially for the Chinese younger generation who were born after the 1980s and the 1920s, could be more confident in handling the relationships of between the two countries than the older generations, because they grew up in a stronger economy. With this confidence, they could be more independent of thinking.
We just talk about how Chinese people see American people by Horizon data. And then let's talk about the Gallup data, how U.S. people see Chinese. Also around late 2011, China Daily and Gallup conducted a survey with a nationally representative sample of 2007 U.S. residents. 42% of all respondents said they expect China to replace the United States as the world's leading power. Americans are split on the implications of China's burgeoning economy. 45% said China's growing economy is a good thing, and 48% said it was a bad thing. Americans are nearly split on their overall view of China. 42% said they have a favorable opinion of China. 44% had a non-favorable view, and 12% don't have an opinion. Despite mixed results on favorability, 71% of respondents said strong relations between the United States and China are important. In a separate question, 81% of respondents said having a close relationship with China is a good thing. And comparing these two sets of data collected by Horizon and Gallup, is there a dissymmetry between how people see each other?
The symmetry, you see that more Chinese are
Do Chinese like American more than the other way around?
Yeah, that's my impression.
You have that same impression.
But I think that, to me, that the U.S. media have played an important role in the misunderstanding. In the past few years, I think the American media have made some improvement. But still, they have instilled a political conception, which is very hard to change. The totalitarian, the Communist Party-led country must be totalitarian. And, the issues like Tibet and Xinjiang, the political position is there.
And Chris, so you've lived in China for quite a while. What about some of the misconceptions Chinese people have about your people?
I've lived in China now for 18 or so months, so about a year and a half, and I am not, there always seems to come some sort of stereotype or, don't you guys do this sort of question. And some of them are laughable, others are, yeah, we do, and,
Can you give us some
for example,
examples?
I've had people ask me about drinking milk with meals, and so like I'll sit down at dinner or lunch, and they'll say, oh yeah, do you want a glass of milk? And I'll say, no, thank you. And they'll say, well, don't you guys drink milk with your meals? And I'll say well, yeah, but not not every time. And so, it's small things like that.
It seems that American people's perceptions of Chinese are pretty polarized. Do these numbers reflect your experiences?
I would say so. Although, again, I would think that a lot of the opinions that I hear are coming from people who don't know enough to form a true opinion. I think really what I see mostly is curiosity coming from American people and my peers, when they hear that I'm living in China or they talk about issues that are related to China, a lot of it is curiosity. They want to know more.
I see. Well, Professor Jing, I remember from talking to you last year, you used a very interesting term to describe China-U.S. relations, which made a very deep impression on me. And you said China and the United States are like a couple with bad relations, but who can't afford to divorce. And what did you mean by that? Can you?
We get to know each other not because we love each other, but because we hate the third-party Soviet Union. But then we establish some real relationship, and now we have very strong so-called interdependence, and we're also aware that it's just impossible to change, to reshape the other side.
So it's still the case today?
Yes.
Still the case.
Yes. But if you want to hurt the other side, you can find a lot of opportunities.
Just like real-life couples.
Yeah.
And also, if we compare the relationship of two countries like a couple, and to keep a marriage alive, you have to cultivate permanently the relationship between the two spouses.
I see. Right. Both countries are going to have the power transitions. And what will be your projections for China-U.S. relations?
According to the experiences in the past 4 decades, each time the U.S. has experiencing a presidential election, China will be, backlashed. Become a victim of partisan politics. So now we are watching some people play the card of backlashing China. So to some extent, the U.S.-China relations will get hurt. But on our side, on Chinese side, I don't think the power transition has a negative impact on U.S.-China relations. We'll see more continuation than change on Chinese side. China's policy towards states usually very stable. The main problem located on U.S. side. But I believe after the presidential election, I think the attitude on U.S. side will back to the normal. So they will annoy us to some extent.
Right.
But if we keep calm, just shadow it, shrug the shadow and keep laughing, then the impact will be limited.
Still be in a marriage.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much.